We know the story. We have heard the legend. A boy named Temujin, born with a clot of blood in his hand, cast out into the wilderness who, through sheer force of will, united the fractious tribes of the steppe. He became Genghis Khan, the universal ruler. His Mongol Empire forged a transcontinental network of trade and cultural exchange, a moment in history where the East and the West were connected as never before. He is often portrayed as a visionary, a statesman, the architect of the modern world. His face stares out from history books, a symbol of power, unity, and monumental achievement. But history is a tale told by the victors, polished by time until its sharpest, most terrifying edges are worn smooth. We celebrate the Silk Roads but forget the rivers of blood that paved them. We marvel at the empire's vastness, but ignore the calculated, systematic horror required to build it. For the Mongols did not merely conquer, they engineered terror on an industrial scale. Their warfare was not just about defeating armies, it was about dismantling the very soul of their enemies, breaking their will to resist before a single arrow was even loosed. This is not a story of isolated brutality, but of a cold, efficient machine of psychological domination. This is the systematic horror of Genghis Khan's conquests. To understand the horror, one must first understand the system. The Mongol military was arguably the most advanced, disciplined, and mobile force the world had ever seen. But their greatest weapon was not the composite bow or the skilled horseman. It was a meticulously crafted doctrine of fear. This was not the random violence of a barbarian horde, a myth we must discard. This was a deliberate, strategic policy, enacted with chilling consistency from the banks of the Yellow River to the gates of Vienna. The system had a simple, brutal logic, encapsulated in a single infamous offer: surrender, and be absorbed into the empire your people spared. Your merchants granted safe passage. Resist and face utter annihilation. This was not a bluff. It was a promise, and it was one the Mongols invariably kept. The term they used was the Great Terror, a campaign of psychological warfare designed to make future cities surrender without a fight, saving the Mongols time, resources, and soldiers' lives. The horror of one city became the salvation of the next. It was a monstrous yet brilliantly effective calculus. We can see the system's blueprint in the fate of the Khwarezmian Empire. In 1219, a Mongol trade caravan was massacred. In response, Genghis Khan himself led a force of 200,000 warriors. The city of Otrar, where the atrocity occurred, was the first to feel the system's weight. It resisted, it fell. The governor was executed by having molten silver poured into his eyes and ears, a symbolic punishment for his failure to see or hear the Khan's authority. But the true horror was what came next. The population was methodically divided. Artisans and those with skills were enslaved and sent east. The young and able-bodied were conscripted into the Mongol ranks, used as human shields in the next assault. The rest, the elderly, the infirm, the ordinary citizens, they were systematically slaughtered. The city was erased. This was not an act of rage. It was a clinical administrative procedure. This template was then applied with terrifying precision. At the city of Urgench, the Mongols broke the dikes and flooded the city before sacking it, drowning the history and the people within it. At Nishapur, where Genghis Khan's son-in-law was killed, the order was given that not even a cat or a dog should be left alive. The skulls of men, women, and children were piled into great pyramids, grim monuments to the cost of defiance. These were not spontaneous atrocities. They were policy. They were messages carved into the earth itself, written in bone and ash. And central to this system of terror was a specific, chilling practice aimed at the very fabric of societal life: the fate of the conquered women. Following a victory, the wives and daughters of slain enemies were systematically collected as part of the spoils of war, a practice known as andaran. They were not simply taken as slaves or concubines, though that was their ultimate fate. They were processed. They were categorized. They were redistributed as rewards to Mongol soldiers and commanders, a crucial currency for maintaining morale and loyalty within the vast army. This was institutionalized, a bureaucratic aspect of horror. A high-ranking wife might be given to a general to cement a political alliance. Others would be forced into a life of servitude. This practice served a dual, devastating purpose. First, it was an ultimate humiliation for the defeated enemy, a final, grotesque victory over their lineage and legacy. Second, and more coldly strategic, It was a form of genetic conquest. By absorbing the women of conquered peoples, the Mongols rapidly expanded their own population, creating new generations loyal to the empire. It was a systematic dismantling of the past to fuel the engine of the Mongol future. The personal horror of countless individuals became a statistic in the empire's demographic ledger. The scale of this horror is etched not just in the accounts of horrified chroniclers like the Persian historian Juvaini, but in the very earth. Modern archaeological surveys of the regions traversed by the Mongol armies show a catastrophic demographic collapse. In parts of Iran and Central Asia, irrigation systems that had sustained civilizations for millennia were shattered and never rebuilt. Villages vanished from the archaeological record, the layers of soil showing a clear, abrupt end to settled life. The silence in the ground speaks volumes. It confirms the historical records of mass death that are so vast they seem impossible, so horrific they seem like exaggeration. But the soil does not lie. The bones do not lie. Genghis Khan died in 1227, but the system of terror he perfected lived on, employed by his successors. It reached its apogee under his grandson Hulagu Khan during the sack of Baghdad in 1258. The intellectual capital of the world was destroyed. The Tigris River was said to have run black with ink from the destroyed libraries and red with the blood of the slain. The Abbasid Caliphate, a 500-year dynasty, was wiped out. The Mongols had become so efficient at the machinery of annihilation that they could dismantle a civilization in a matter of days. So what is the legacy of this systematic horror? It is a paradox. The Pax Mongolica, the peace that eventually followed the conquests, did indeed open up trade routes and foster an unprecedented exchange of ideas, technology, and goods between Europe and Asia. But this peace was built upon a foundation of unimaginable violence, a trauma so deep, it reshaped the demographics and psychology of entire regions for centuries. The world was connected, but at a price so terrible we still struggle to comprehend it. The story of Genghis Khan forces us to confront an unsettling truth about history itself. Progress and horror are often intertwined, two sides of the same coin. The light of cultural exchange and global connection is cast by a shadow of methodical industrial-scale terror. We are left to ponder a disturbing question. Can the ends ever justify the means when the means are so utterly inhuman? The silent, wind-swept ruins of 1,000 forgotten cities scattered across the steppes of Asia seem to hold their answer, a perpetual, haunting whisper on the edge of history.